Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is a webinar on cyber insurance. Our guest speaker today is John Reith, and my name is Ian Smith. I'm from SyncraTec Solutions, and the topic is why cyber insurance is important for small businesses. And I'm going to just let John go ahead and get started with the presentation.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, Ian. Appreciate you having me on and excited to dive into a conversation that I think is on the top of a lot of people's mind. You know, cyber insurance has definitely grown in popularity, as well as people just becoming more and more aware of it over the last couple of years. And a couple big reasons for that, which we'll dive into here. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive right in. I always like to tell folks that, you know, any questions pop up, don't hesitate. I'm going to make sure to drop in all of our contact information at the end so you can always reach out. First things first, just a little bit of background on DataStream and give you an idea of where some of the data you're going to see is coming from, as well as give you just a little bit of insight in who we are. But we are an expert cyber insurance brokerage with access to pretty much the entire cyber insurance market. We work with about 40 plus carriers right now, and we partner up with MSPs, MSSPs, and other great IT partners like Ian and the folks at SyncraTec. To make sure that not only themselves, but their customers understand how to navigate what is currently an unstandardized cyber insurance market. Make sure they understand how to truly go out there and shop and obtain the best policies at the best price. And our parent company is actually one of the ways we have a really unique insight into the market. Their name is Envelop Risk, and they actually sit behind all of the carriers we work with as a reinsurer, and reinsurer just insures insurance companies, but they sit on top of about 90% of the global cyber insurance data. So gives us a real insight into the market and what's going on. So you know that some of the data you're going to see is not just us, sticking our fingers in the wind and making educated guesses. It's coming from really large data sets, right? Any other data that's not coming from there will actually be noted, like you're seeing here down in the bottom right with this star. But let's dive right in. So cyber insurance in general, the reason it's risen in popularity and kind of people actually obtaining cyber insurance over the last few years is because of the threat, right? That smaller and medium-sized businesses are facing now. It's just rapidly grown year over year, and to the point where last year, we had 61% of businesses, smaller businesses, having an attack. The average cost of a successful data breach for those smaller guys is 3.3 million, right? So it's not necessarily a huge surprise that for those attacks that succeed, 25% end up going bankrupt and 10% of those companies end up going out of business. Don't want to sit here and just scare everybody, but it is important to know that the risk is real, right? SMBs are being targeted, and there's a couple reasons why, right? At the bottom, you can see is the money to steal, right? That was kind of always the case for cyber attacks in the past. That's still the case, right? They still are going after direct funding and things like that. But obviously, for the smaller guys, that's not as much of a focus as maybe if you're going after an enterprise company. For the smaller guys, it's really more about, do you have important data, right? Or can you afford to be shut down, right? So a company that can't afford to be shut down and needs to be, open 24/7, or is expected by their clients to be open maybe nearly 24/7, they can't afford to shut down, right? Their reputation is on the line. And so a company that can come in and brick them up, a bad actor that can come in and shut them down, by shutting down their systems, can hold them for ransom. And that's the same with the data, right? Ransomware attacks have really bridged that gap between enterprise and the smaller guys. And so now these bad actors are just going around checking doorknobs. And sadly, SMBs are still often easy targets. That's the other reason why they're, have really seen the benefits in shifting their focus, because enterprise guys have been taking cybersecurity seriously for a long time now, right? So suddenly they can shift their focus and target a bunch of the smaller guys who are not taking their security seriously at all, and suddenly it's a much easier attack, right? The scary stat I always like to point out on this slide is 50% of smaller companies are not providing employee cybersecurity training, which human error is always going to be the largest factor, right? Humans are humans. We make mistakes. We click that link in that email that one time, and that's all it takes, right? This slide I like a lot because it shows that this is happening across the board, right? So this is a sampling of 4,000 cyber insurance claims, right, from our parent company. The important numbers I want everybody to look at is the dollars and cents here, right? So the idea being that you are too small to get hit with a cyber attack is a myth, right? And not only that, but you can get hit by pretty gnarly cyber attacks, right? If we're looking at the average loss, not a great day, right? At a 0 to 10 employee count, the smallest one, 131,000 average loss, with a worse claim loss looking at $10 million for a 0 to 10 employee count, right? So idea that, I'm too small, nobody's going to target me, is a myth, right? They're just targeting absolutely everybody and seeing what doors are open and what they can get to. So what's the solution? And actually, the solution it's fairly straightforward, right? It's actually the same solution, the same approach that we take for other risks that we face in our day-to-day lives, right? The example I really like is the fire risk as an example. It's all about the balance between investing in your own resources and investing in the collective resources, right? Your own resources are the tools, technologies, right? For fire, those are your fire extinguishers, your sprinklers, right? The smoke alarms, the detectors, all those things that are ultimately going to hopefully reduce the frequency and severity of those incidents, right? But you also still invest in the collective resources for that tail end of risk, right? The remaining risk that can't be covered by the tools and technologies. That's where the collective resources come into play, right? So that's insurance, that's for fire, the fire department, but fire also has fire insurance. And in fact, without some of those tools and technologies in place, right, as a business, in order to obtain fire insurance, you're going to be required to have, certain number of fire extinguishers. You're going to need to have your, fire exits labeled appropriately, all of these things. And cyber is no different, right? It's going to be a balance between resources and the collective resources, aka insurance. So first step, right, is how do you invest in your own resources? How do you reduce that risk? Well, that's your cybersecurity program, right? That's getting those basic cybersecurity controls in place that are, as we mentioned, reducing that severity and frequency of those potential events, right? And step 3, planning for the failure, right, of security controls, having a layered approach, right? Tools are tools, and tools can be broken, right? These bad actors are constantly, in fact, trying to break these tools. And humans are humans, right? We already talked about that. Human error will always exist. So having a layered approach to cybersecurity is incredibly important. And not only that, but having an incident response plan in place for when the incident does occur. This is one of the areas we over here at DataStream are happy to assist with, getting at least the basics in place, putting in order who you're going to contact, in what order they need to be contacted in, who is prioritized, who's at the top of that list, so on and so forth, so that in those first 5-10 minutes exactly what your first steps are. Those first 5-10 minutes during an incident are so crucial, and in fact so important that some sort of instant response plan, or IRP as it's often called, is becoming more and more of a requirement by the carriers themselves. So if you don't have an instant response plan in place yet, highly recommend jumping in using our builder to get a hard copy that you print out, so you have those contacts right there, printed out physically again, so that if your system gets bricked up, you still have the information needed in order to make those phone calls, right? So that's the front end, right? The tools and technologies, the sprinklers, the smoke alarms, right? In order to reduce that risk. But just like any other risk, you can only take that so far, right? Trying to quote unquote, the closer you get to 100% protection, which there really isn't such a thing, but the closer you get, the more expensive it gets to try and get there, right? So typically you use tools and technologies to get, 80, maybe 90% of the way there. Then you transfer the remaining risk that you can't eliminate, right? That's exactly why insurance was created for any risk, and cyber is no different. But I want to talk about some of the differences out there. I know there is some ambiguity, lots of confusion around cyber liability. And so I want to make very clear what cyber liability is covering versus some of the other coverages out there that you've heard of, right? So there still is some confusion around this, and it's understandable because once upon a time, there actually was a bit of cyber coverage in your general liability and commercial liability policies. But this is no longer the case. In fact, the vast majority of these policies will now have exclusionary language in them around cyber liability coverage. It basically will say that this policy is not going to cover anything that is covered in a cyber liability policy, right? So you cannot lean on your general or commercial anymore. Another common one are these riders or add-ons on top of a general liability or commercial liability policy. And I even have a hard time making an argument that they're better than nothing. The cyber add-ons or riders are typically incredibly limited in their dollars and cents. I think 50, maybe $250,000 when compared to we just saw, average data breach costs hitting broaching that kind of $3 million average. So 50 to 250, not necessarily going to do a whole lot in that case, right? But they can also be very limited in the language that's going on, right? And can leave little gaps and loopholes for carriers to potentially finagle their way out of even paying that $50,000 rider that you have, right? So your riders, add-ons, endorsements are really, they're just not going to cut it in the face of a true cyber incident. Tech E&O is a different product. It's actually designed to protect you against yourself. Errors and omissions in general, you can kind of think of as designed to protect you against yourself, negligence, mistakes, protect you against whoopsie daisies, right? Something that you did on accident that ended up causing damage, to a customer, right? Via a service, right? So technology errors and omissions specifically designed to protect you against some sort of technology service that you offer, you made a mistake, and that ended up causing a customer damage, right? Whereas cyber liability is truly designed to protect you against third-party attacks, right? Against, a cyber incident, some bad actor who's actually targeting you and trying to cause an incident, right? So a couple big differences there, but what does a cyber liability policy actually cover? And specifically a broad policy. This is a real kind of big point I want to make as we're moving forward is the market is unstandardized, right? So what you'll see is not all of the carriers have policies that are offering all of this. As you kind of move down the carrier list, what you'll start to see is some of the carriers drop some of these coverages, right? But a good broad cyber policy is going to have both first and third party coverage. So it's going to protect, obviously, from any damages directly to you. But third party coverage, ideally, it's going to protect you against potential lawsuits that are thrown your way if an incident should trickle from you down into any customers or vendors that you work with and they turn around potentially suing you for damages. So third party liability is very important and is one of these things that can be dropped by some of the carriers as you move down the list of them. So all the others are also incredibly important, right? So it's going to cover data breaches, the legal fees, customer notifications, IT forensics, right? All the aspects of a data breach. Business interruption and contingent business interruption are two very important areas of coverage. Business interruption designed to protect you against, the downtime during an incident. So it's going to cover lost revenue, help you get back up and running. It'll even pay for things like salary for employees who are helping your business get back up and running. And contingent business interruption is actually to cover the lost revenue from a third party's failure, right? Similar to that third party liability. Cyber extortion ransomware, we already touched on a little bit, paying the ransoms, right? All that good stuff, ideally going to be covered. This is an area that you could also see dropped, or even aggressive limits thrown on top of this as you kind of move down the list of carriers. And of course, cybercrime, right? That's kind of your direct stealing. You can think of it as, right? They actually break in, or they get you to maybe transfer a big amount of money to the wrong person, right? That's fraudulent transfer. It's another very common one that people are seeing nowadays. So you've heard me kind of say, as you move down that list of carriers, and this is because what we're seeing really right now is a bit of a tiered system develop among the carriers. At the kind of top of this list, you have, the better carriers offering the better policies at the better pricing, but also kind of naturally are the ones who are asking more of their customers. They're going to have more controls that they're asking. While you can, move down that list, and you might find some other carriers without as many of the requirements, that's where you'll see, just as we mentioned, some of those areas of coverage might start to drop, right? Or it might not be a pay on behalf policy, which is highly recommended, which has to do with your claim process. A pay on behalf policy, the carrier is going to come in and pay for those costs right up front, right then and there. Versus some of these guys offer a reimbursement type policy where you cover the costs up front and then you're kind of battling the carrier to get them to pay you back on it, right? In terms of the cost, right? This is another big question I always get, right? Okay, well, what is the average cost that folks are seeing out there? This is really important because it is a wide spectrum, again, unstandardized market. So you can have some folks that are even quite a bit higher than this. But in terms of offering a reasonable premium when we're looking at those carriers, this is going to be the annual average, right? So cyber insurance is charged annually, and this is going to be for $1 million policy. And the $1 million policy has very quickly become the kind of most common policy sold to the smaller guys. A couple of reasons for that, but a big one, we've already seen kind of the numbers in terms of average costs and damages and things like that. So the $1 million policy very quickly became the most common one sold. And the average annual cost for one right now is sitting in between that $1,500 and $8,000 mark, right? Just really want to give everybody an idea of what that cost could potentially look like. And the deductible should be somewhere in between 2,500 and 10,000 ideally as well, right? Now this is the average, but when you work with DataStream, again, we're really there to help educate, make sure you are getting those appropriate tools in place to open the doors to the best carriers. And so 70% of the companies that apply for quotes with our platform end up getting offered $1 million policy between $900 and $2,600, right? Just to give everybody an idea of what it looks like working with an expert to go out and navigate this currently unstandardized space, right? Now let's dive into some of the real meat and potatoes and how SyncraTec really connects in, right? And comes in as the expert in the tools and technologies. We've already touched on, how important it is to get some of those basics in place. That's exactly where SyncraTec comes in, right? Now let's touch on how those controls, those basic, the fire extinguishers, the sprinklers, how those are affecting cyber insurance. What are the tools that the carriers are looking for to open their doors to offer you a policy? And this is just a selection. I want to let everybody know it's just a selection of them. We do have the full checklist that I would be happy to share if anybody would like it, or chat with your member from SyncraTec. They'll be able to take you through that as well. But I want to make sure to give everybody at least a taste of what some of the big requirements, some of the main ones that the carriers are looking for, right? So offsite and cloud backups is going to be basically a universal requirement across the board for all the carriers going to be very difficult to get a policy. Similar to MFA, actually, at this point. We're not so much seeing discounting done. There's a couple of carriers I have seen and chatted with that are starting to offer some discounting around MFA. It's the first tool that I've really seen this even be offered. It's typically between kind of an 8 to 10% discount for having MFA in place, so to speak. Typically, it's really all about open and closed doors, right? So having MFA in general is going to be very difficult for the vast majority of carriers, aside from those couple that are starting to do the discounting. For the vast majority, it's really just going to be a requirement, right? Having MFA in place, there is going to be an absolute necessity. And then as we move down the list, this particularly gets more important as you grow as well, but also to open the doors to those better and better carriers, right? They're the ones who are really going to want to see some of these, but as we mentioned, also for the larger guys, and you'll see here the higher risk industries, right? So some of these industries are getting hit and hammered harder than others, right? You can think like a healthcare company is going to be sitting on a bit more risky data than maybe your just average kind of retail shop. So some of these guys are going to be more specific in terms of what they're requiring out of industry. So EDR, MDR, XDR, all kind of being looked at very similarly right now. All those are going to be looked at and required for the larger guys and the higher risk industries. And employee awareness training is becoming even more and more a requirement just across the board. The carriers are understanding that human error is always going to be a really big factor. And so especially for those the better policies, unlocking the better policies at the better price, employee awareness training is going to be so incredibly important. And really, without these basics, the carriers, especially the good ones, are not going to touch you in terms of offering you insurance. And in fact, they'll view you as uninsurable. All right. So we've already touched on it a little bit, but I really like to hammer home the myth, that we're often seeing out there is folks looking for that discount by getting the tools in place. And as I've already mentioned, it's really not so much that we're seeing just yet individual carriers offering a discount. We're absolutely heading in that direction, right? As the carriers start to understand the data and the risk better, absolutely heading in that direction. But right now, it really is just about open and closed doors, right? So having better internal posture is going to open the doors to the better carriers at the better pricing, right? I really like this kind of image here. You can kind of imagine it as these three options, and you get to pick two of the three, right? You can either go with a carrier with, fewer requirements, but that does mean sacrificing one of these, right? It means the cost is going to go up, or maybe some of those areas of coverage start getting dropped, right? Like maybe ransomware is just not covered at all on the policy, right? So for what we recommend is going after the best coverage at the lowest cost, which is going to require getting some of those controls in place. But that just ultimately puts you in a much safer position, right? It gets you better internal posture and gets you the best cyber insurance at the best pricing, right? So now that we've had a chance to review cyber insurance, kind of the ins and outs of navigating the space and how it is an unstandardized market, I want to make sure folks are set up for success and ensuring that when you do get cyber insurance, you can have a successful claim process as well and make sure that your claim is not denied. I also added this slide because it was a common question I was getting. There does seem to be a bit of a stigma around, hey, I heard cyber insurance doesn't really pay out, right? Is not the best. When in fact, it is a result of this unstandardized market. As you can imagine, some folks out there just grabbing whatever they can. Some of those policies are coming from those carriers that aren't necessarily at the top of that list, right? But there's really kind of two big paths or avenues I often mention that this stigma is coming out of. The first one is going to be incorrectly representing yourself on the application when you're applying for cyber insurance, right? So as you fill out an application, there's going to be a cybersecurity portion. where they ask you about the controls you currently have in place. And if you incorrectly represent yourself there, the carrier is going to do their due diligence come claim time. And so if they find out you're missing any of those tools, that can absolutely lead to a claims denial, right? And then the second way is these riders. We've already chatted about it a little bit. Riders, add-ons, endorsements with the non-explicit language, the gaps, the wiggle room that they leave for the carriers to kind of finagle their way out of paying those claims, right? So the 3 ways to avoid a denial: don't rely on those riders, right out the gate. Let's not lean on those riders, add-ons, or endorsements. That's just all a synonym for the same thing. Let's not rely on those, right? They're not explicit enough, they're not strong enough, and we've already seen they're typically $50,000 to $250,000, and not even if we do get them to pay out, not necessarily. It's kind of a drop in the bucket, right? Number 2, working with experts to correctly apply for insurance, right? So important to correctly represent yourself. I know it's tempting and folks see those questions and they just want to roll through and select yes on all of them because they're worried that checking the box no will mean that they won't get offered the cyber insurance. But it's not necessarily the case, and it is way more important to be honest, because the carriers are going to do their due diligence. They're going to bring forensics teams in during a claim, and they're going to do digging in to find out if those tools were actually in place during the incident. So make sure you're answering those correctly. Really work with an expert to fill it out. Somebody like SyncraTec, to go in, make sure that you're not just, checking boxes on there. And number 3, ideally, keep good records of those tools and controls in place, right? If you walk in, to claims court with a stack of paperwork proving out all the tools that you had in place, you got screenshots and shows all of those, it's going to be very, very difficult for a carrier to deny a claim, all right? So as we kind of wrap up here, it's become pretty obvious how you navigate this space. It's all about working with experts right now. Cyber security as a whole is complex, and an expert in the space is absolutely needed. So working with, folks like SyncraTec to get your IT house in order, right? Get those basic controls in place first. And then work with an expert to create your insurance plan, right? Your plan of action for going out and shopping for insurance. And truly, ideally, shopping through as much of the market as you can, right? Unstandardized markets. So some of those carriers are even more focused on certain industries or certain size companies. And so if you're not in that industry, they're going to overcharge you or things of that nature, right? So go out, shop as many carriers as you can. And that's exactly where DataStream can come into play, right? This is what it looks like in action when we actually partner up with a IT partner like SyncraTec and help their customer through this process. This is a case study of that exact thing happening, not with SyncraTec specifically, but another IT partner of ours. And I really like this page because it just shows kind of everything coming together, right? So you can go after several carriers out there with more expensive premium and fewer technology requirements. But this is what we recommend, right? We've already touched on it, but you go get some of those extra technologies in place that actually put you in a more secure environment. It's actually going to reduce your premium, and so that your net cost ends up being potentially less, if not very, very similar to if you had gone after one of those other guys. For this case study, it was a company that we ended up saving 23% on their premiums, right? They did this by upgrading their antivirus. They implemented a VPN site-to-site with MFA and purchased a phishing and spam detection product, right? By getting all of that in place, it dropped their premium, and it resulted in a net annual cost, a slight increase, but only of $30, right? To be in a much more secure environment, with better internal posture and a better cyber insurance product. These are a couple other case studies I like to touch on just because sometimes you're already doing the right things, and we just need to go out and shop and open up more of the market to you to get you better pricing, right? So we've had a couple companies who were really overpaying. One company paying almost $30,000 for $1 million cyber insurance policy, which is crazy. We saw the average sitting somewhere in the $1,500 to $8,000 mark. So just by going and doing some shopping, we actually tripled their coverage up to 3 million and saved them money. Saved them almost $11,000, right? So just an example of how different the market is right now, how unstandardized it truly is, and how some folks are getting stuck really overpaying for policies right now, when they don't need to be, when sometimes they're already doing the right things and they just happen to be with a carrier who is not offering credit for doing those right things, right? But that is going to be the wrap up here for today's conversation. I appreciate everybody hopping in and joining me. I always like to hang out for a bit for Q&A, but also like to post up, obviously, all of our contact information here so that if anybody does have questions that they want to just ask directly, you can also reach out directly. But thank you all for joining. And yeah, I'll definitely hang around and answer any questions. But thanks so much.
Thanks, John. That was a great presentation. Maybe just one word on how the process looks from your side. Like, where is there a link that they can click on to get a quote, something like that?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Anybody that's interested in diving in and checking out quotes today, simply visit datastreaminsurance.com and click on get a quote in the top right, and they'll start guiding you through that process. It's really easy. And our application, we've even taken down some of the legalese language that a lot of those applications are written in, so it should be ideally even easier to navigate. There's a nice little share button in the top right corner so that when they do hit the cybersecurity portion of the application, very easy for them to share it over with the folks at SyncraTec, their contact at SyncraTec, to collaborate, make sure those answers are correct, right? Make sure those cybersecurity portion is answered as accurately as possible before clicking submit on the application. And then after that, once the application is submitted, it's typically pretty quick. Just depending, but well, for the vast majority of the carriers, for SMBs, it's a fully digital application process. So typically within a few hours, we start getting quotes back, and we'll start bringing in a nice apples to apples comparison of all their options that they can choose from.
Good stuff. Well, I appreciate it today, John. Thanks so much for the wealth of information here, and I hope everybody got something out of it. I think it was really informative.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a big topic, and cybersecurity in general is becoming more and more important to SMBs. So thank you for having me. Anytime. Always happy to jump on and chat with folks and your team anytime.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Great job. Thank you, John. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
Bye.